Okay, so I would like to introduce our next speaker. This is our next keynote speech by Professor Bill Roscoe, ex-head of department, ex-head of the computer science department at University of Oxford, and lead at the Blockchain Research Center at Oxford. So without further ado, I will let him start. Begin. You have your microphone over there. Oh, you can use this one. If not, just this one. Sorry, maybe it's on.
This one's on, okay. Okay, great. Can you all hear me okay? Well, I take that as a yes. Well, here I am. I think this is, I've now actually lived in Oxford for 48 years, since I arrived here as a math undergraduate in 1975. This is the first time I've ever had a chance to talk here in the main hall of the town hall. A great honor for me. The last person I heard talking in this room was Stephen Hawking. Fortunately, he had his artificial voice by this time, so he gave a very great talk on his work. So, who am I? I'm obviously old. I am a computer scientist by training and by trade. And I've worked around computer science research now for over 40 years, working for most of that time on what you might term classical computer science topics, such as concurrency, which is the study of interacting decentralized systems, security, and automated verification of systems. All of these are highly relevant to blockchain. I've been working on blockchain for what's beginning to seem quite a long time, at 6 years or so. So one of my claims to distinction is that I was head of Oxford University Computer Science Department for 11 years. But I'm now actually partially retired from the university, and the work I'm doing on blockchain, I want to emphasize, is separate from my work at the department at the university. It's not separate from the university as a whole, because a lot of the work I do is through the University College Oxford Blockchain Research Centre, of which I am head. And if you look up that Blockchain Research Centre, or if you look at my company, which is called TBTL, you will find many more details on all the things I'm going to be talking about today. My motivation for getting involved in blockchain is probably different from that of almost everybody else in the room today. I got into blockchain because, well, I was so eminently well qualified to work on it. I loved mathematical problems, I loved computer science problems, and blockchain seemed to me a tremendously elegant mathematical and data structure, but with so many rough edges that I wanted to work on. So as I say, the basic concept of a blockchain is hugely beautiful to me as somebody who appreciates mathematical and algorithmic beauty, but I wanted to improve it. And I have developed over these years some striking new, what I regard as improvements to basic blockchain. When I accepted the invitation to come here to talk today, I gave the organizers the choice of either me talking about digital civilization, which is what I'm talking about now, or how I would improve the blockchain. They choose the former, but if anybody wants to pursue my talk that I would have given, then they can find it on the TBTL or UNIV Blockchain Center websites. So I came to realize very quickly that blockchain was, of course, the absolute epitome of how you make high-integrity systems, how you create decentralized systems which are nevertheless have as near to perfect integrity as you can hope to get, and as near as possible perfect model and understanding of the trust which exists in such systems. And so I wanted to build such systems. I wanted to build decentralized systems that everybody could trust for use for, let's call it, mainstream civilization-oriented purposes as well as financial transactions. And I wanted to take away the negative image that blockchain certainly had 6 years ago, and I think still does have today in many quarters. I wanted to make people think only positively about blockchain. And I quickly gained sponsors from China who were interested in me promoting blockchain as the cornerstone of a more civilized society. And so they asked me to start up this digital civilization initiative that I'm talking about today. The underlying theme that I am grasping for is not a problem that I imagine that you have. I mean, what we have in this room today is a lot of people who are really expert in tech. I'm sure most of you are far more expert in the day-to-day practicalities of tech than I am. But most of society is not. And what I want to do is I want to create a way in which civilization as a whole can cope with the overwhelming tidal wave of digital technology which is overwhelming them all. And by this, I don't mean just a lot of people who are keen on making money out of crypto. What I mean is everybody in society, because we're increasingly seeing that everybody has to interact with the nuts and bolts, the wheels of society through the internet, through many, many different portals. You have to buy train tickets online. You have to interact with your bank online. You have to get your healthcare online, all sorts of things. And these days you're practically excluded if you're simply not a tech-literate person, or you are not rich enough to afford the toys of digital life, such as smartphones. Actually, the last few days I've given away some old tech that I had replaced myself to some poorer people, and they were absolutely over the moon to get it, of course, because it meant that, you know, they could now be better connected to the world. And equally, I have a... Thanks very much. And equally, I have a lot of old relatives, including my mother, who are constantly getting in touch with me, asking me how to do this or that. We have to fight digital exclusion. So I want us to build a society, a decentralized society, in such a way that we are inclusive as possible, and at the same time, a high integrity and protect everybody's rights. So we all believe we're moving to a world dominated by computation and data, and our interactions with it, which are less and less voluntary. We have to ask ourselves, are we being ruled by it and the authorities that run it? Because we find that the world is increasingly being run by governments and big tech companies that run, if you like, internet core applications, like cloud services, for example. Are we overwhelmed by the complexity of that interaction with no idea what data is being held or what is done with it? And I think that's probably true of you as well, even though you might claim it wasn't. One is simply presented with far too many things you have to agree with in order to use systems these days. To me, digital civilization means making this new universe, which I think is inevitable, ordered, understandable, high in integrity, transparently trustworthy, and civilized. And I'm really appealing to those creating the digital world to sit up and take notice, while at the same time trying to provide a hint at some of the solutions to this problem. It must be convenient, well understood, and trustworthy. We shouldn't have to relearn every new portal that comes along. Typically at the moment, we all probably log on to a few new websites every day, and each one has a subtly different interface. The same questions are asking for different data, all sorts of things. Nor should we manually give permissions to things endlessly. I sometimes curse GDPR, not because it's not a good idea in terms of letting everybody protect their data, but rather because the way it's being implemented is ludicrous, in the sense that one is constantly being asked for permission for cookies, for various sort of handling of the data, with long screeds of terms and conditions that nobody ever reads. It's just ridiculous. So we need a better way to understand what's happening to data and be happy with it. And one of the most important roles that I see for a digital civilization portal would be an automated portal for each of us that we program to know whether a given set of conditions was acceptable, unacceptable, or needed more questioning. You should feel in control. You must know that no one can misuse your assets and data, and you must know that nobody can invade your privacy. And I will say that the old-fashioned world that I grew up in, perhaps many of you were already getting digitized by the time you were in your diapers, but certainly the world I grew up in the 1950s and 60s was very much pre-computing. And this was true not because people would not have misused your data, people would not have intruded if they could have done. It's just they didn't have the technology to do that. Now, however, we are beginning to see that everybody has the technology to misuse data, and therefore they've got to be controlled. Because clearly our digital environment is developing far too fast. Traditional civilization emerged over thousands of years and produced rules that were not too bad. Not perfect, but not too bad. Whereas the digital environment has basically evolved into an oligarchy of government and big tech, driven by perceptions of trust. When I was fairly recently become head of department of Oxford CS, I was constantly being visited by big tech companies, as you could imagine. And one that particularly sticks in my mind was I was visited by a very senior person in Google. And I was somewhat skeptical about the concept of cloud security at the time. And I expressed this to him. And his response, which I regarded as somewhat of a joke at the time, but I've come to regard as being perfectly prophetic and true, was people trust us, we're Google. You've got to imagine the quotes around that. And of course I didn't trust Google at the time. I still don't trust Google, but basically you've got no choice but to trust the big tech companies, because anybody else will be in some sense less trustworthy, because in some sense they've got less to lose if they abuse you. So they're perhaps easier to trust than the small players. And we have to note how cloud services that we all use constantly these days are dominated by big tech. So what we need is technology to allow us to trust the people who are operating our data. We need the technology of trust. Trust, and I'm going to describe exactly what that means in a minute. So we need international agreement in an altruistic spirit to create common, consistent interfaces that handle our interface to digital civilization and our data. And we need complete transparency and certainty of the laws and regulations that are automatically implemented by it. We need the world to realize that all of this is vital for the future of civilization and society. We need to undertake the necessary design with a positive international collaboration rather than the selfish interests of particular countries. When I first got interested in blockchain, one thing that really struck me in talking to big companies at the time was that these companies were all asking themselves, what can blockchain do for me? How can I persuade everybody to use my blockchain technology rather than letting the blockchain in some sense be a common good? So all the companies, and I shan't name them, were basically trying to concentrate their customers' use of blockchain entirely on their technology, for example, which struck me as entirely wrong. But this is, I'm afraid, what society and what commerce does to people. So we have to somehow foster an altruistic spirit that pulls people away from this. So we have to use technology that guarantees that rules are followed without needing to trust the people who are running it. Think about that for a minute. We need people to be running technology for us, which we can trust independently of whether we trust the people who are running the technology for us. It's inevitable that anything claiming to be digital civilization is going to be decentralized, like like most blockchains, for example. And so we need trustless technology, and we need attitudes, laws, and regulation to both guide this and keep pace. So we need to be able to trust a society run by this technology rather than constantly looking over our shoulders to see what the big tech companies are doing to us. So what is trustless technology? Well, blockchain, as characteristically put forward, is an example of this. A community can trust technology without trusting the entities who operate it. By the entities, I mean the companies and the organizations. It typically ensures transparency, adherence to rules, and other forms of integrity by itself, and it effectively eliminates ways for the dishonest insiders, or indeed the less than altruistic company that is running it, from undermining that. Thus, an operator A can operate a service at a higher level of trust than the world has in A itself. The main options are blockchain, where of course we have this sort of common trust model, trusted enclaves, and things like multi-party computing and things like homomorphic cryptography, which I heard coming out of the last panel session. So essentially what we're doing is we're trying to get angelic behavior from a system run by demons, hence the picture of the angel mask and the demon mask on the slide. Now, trustless technology should therefore free us from, if you like, a reputation-based oligarchy of big tech companies and governments who force us basically to use the technology even though they may not be as trustworthy as they claim they are. Because they claim they're too big to cheat, for example, or because we perceive them as being too big to cheat. And for example, let's look at what I call the TikTok cat scam. This cat on this slide here was the star of a TikTok channel run by a Financial Times journalist a month or two ago. This Financial Times journalist was researching TikTok. And some insiders at TikTok didn't like the fact that she was doing this and thought they would please their bosses effectively by tracking her through her cat's use of TikTok. I don't know how expert the cat was herself or himself at using TikTok, but I imagine most of this use was actually carried out by the lady who was doing the journalism. And as a result of this, of course, TikTok held up their hands and said, we were wrong, we shouldn't have done this, we sacked the people concerned. But of course, what we have to realize is that the technology that they were operating and promising they would behave properly was being used by them against us. And what I say is that you should not be operating technology that could be abused by insiders in this sort of way. And this sort of thing and many other examples in the world create a universal suspicion of data holders. And of course, we also want to provide a high integrity provenance and audit service for this data. And this should automatically come forward from this trustless technology. So the digital economy that I would like to create will not just involve money, but also be multifaceted. So, for example, instead of running just a money-based economy, we can run one based upon carbon credits and this sort of thing. Basically, people will be forced to live by their own promises and principles. Of course, it should protect the mainstream principles of finance that we have learned over the years. The recent banking crises that we've gone through in the first half of this year do illustrate to me that the mainstream financial system is not as trustworthy as we might have felt it was. And that basically what we should be doing is we should be producing a blockchain-based financial system which is clearly more trustworthy and better regulated, but also adheres to the economic principles that we would expect of if you like, the mainstream system if working properly. digital civilization should largely prevent crises of confidence, as appeared there. And so I push the concept that TEs and blockchain should be combined together to produce a framework for digital civilization, as well as everything else they can do. So let me finish this by just talking about one or two things that I have been doing recently. For example, I've just come back from a trip to Laos, a country in Southeast Asia, who seem to be enthusiastically adopting my ideas in digital civilization. This is a picture of me meeting the Prime Minister of Laos 3 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, in which I and some people who have adopted my ideas, called MetaBank, are pushing these ideas to basically create digital transformation in Southeast Asian countries. Finally, sitting there, hold up your hand, Ron, there is Ron, who works with me and is engaged in a project called Committable. Now, Committable is an aspect of digital civilization which you would not expect, given what I've talked about. Essentially, it takes advantage of an idea I created, that you should combine blockchain with trusted computing involving code analysis and compilation to enable the better management of trust in software. And in particular, Ron is producing this product called Committable, which is essentially a GitHub-like or GitHub extension, which allows people to mint NFTs or similar cryptocurrency-based assets on the back of effort in programming. So at this point, I better stop, and thanks very much.